Hello, Buckeye fans. We've got some good news for you today, February 15th. It's a Thursday, and Ohio State announced just a little while ago some updates with the coaching staff, including the promotion of James Laurinaitis to linebackers coach, a move that we saw coming, but wasn't a foregone conclusion. I'm Patrick Murphy with Bucknuts and 24/7 Sports, here with Bill Kurlick. Bill, surprised at all by this move, or is it what you expected?
Well, if you would have asked me maybe 3 weeks ago, I would have maybe had a little surprise 3 weeks ago, a month ago, whatever, because Jason Taylor was the other name, and you and I have both talked about both those possibilities quite a bit. So maybe back then, but after what's happened the last week or two, I had mentioned in one of my columns that I was told that it looks like Jason Taylor is staying at Miami. And that's not a shocker. I mean, he's already there and on staff, and also it's not really a shocker. With Jason Taylor out of the picture, I think I would have been shocked or surprised if James Laurinaitis wasn't the guy that got the job at Ohio State. And I think it's a great move by Ryan Day. I think it's a great move for James Laurinaitis, and I think it's a great move for Ohio State. So I think it's a win-win-win situation.
Yeah, the directions Ryan Day could have gone were probably threefold. This was the spot vacated when Ohio State let go of Parker Fleming, the special teams coordinator. So the Buckeyes could have gone out and gotten another special teams coordinator, which always seemed like the least likely thing to happen. As you mentioned, Bill, they discussed trying to find what would essentially be an assistant defensive line coach, somebody to work with Larry Johnson and kind of help on the recruiting and when Larry decides to retire down the road. And we'll get to Larry Johnson here in a minute because there's more news on that. And then finally, bringing in a full-time linebackers coach. That obviously has been something that Jim Knowles has had under his umbrella as well as being the defensive coordinator. And then James Laurinaitis, when he came in as a graduate assistant last year, kind of took on the responsibilities of that despite not having that title. So the process kind of played out. I think Ryan Day, from my understanding, really let the conversations happen. And from there, they settled on James Laurinaitis. Bill, from the recruiting perspective, and I know you just put a story on Bucknuts about this, what does James Laurinaitis bring in a nutshell now, especially that he's had a chance to go on the road and recruit?
Well, for one thing, a lot of cachet. When he walks into that building now, well, he has been doing that because Ohio State has been down, had an open slot as far as coaching position. So he has been doing that. And now he'll be able to continue doing that. So several things, the cachet, he is a proven great Ohio State college linebacker. He is a proven great NFL linebacker. So that carries a lot of weight. Tim Walton, he was an NFL guy and all that really means something. So I think that is a big factor, but also the fact that when he goes into homes and when he goes into high schools with that O on his chest, he not only goes in there as a coach for the Buckeyes, but he goes in there having been a great player for Ohio State. He can say, hey, I know what it means to be a great player at Ohio State. I've been through it. And that's really big. That's important. And then he can also now go out when he recruits and when kids come to campus and say, hey, I'm going to be your coach. And that's important too. Previously, when he was going out on the road, he couldn't necessarily say, I'm going to be the full-time linebackers coach. I'll be your coach. I'll be there at Ohio State. He can say that now. So, and that's very, very important too. His name carries a lot of weight. Us young guys maybe don't know him as well, but no, I jest, of course. You see the gray hair there. But with the high school kids, they know who he is, even though his playing career has been over for a few years. The linebackers I talk to around the country they are very well aware of who James Laurinaitis is as a former great NFL player and a guy that was a great one in college at Ohio State. So that brings a lot to it as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Tim Walton, Brian Hartline, another example of a guy who had a great Ohio State career, had a really good NFL career, maybe not quite the level of James Laurinaitis, and obviously with little experience coaching before he got into it at Ohio State, has gone on to be a very good wide receivers coach, now co-offensive coordinator. You mentioned James Laurinaitis' accolades, 3-time All-American, 3-time consensus All-American, 3-time first team All-Big Ten, 2-time Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year, won the Buckeyes Award, the Bronco Nagurski Award, the Lott Trophy. The list goes on and on. Is the all-time leading tackler in the history of the Los Angeles/St. Louis Rams during his time there. Also played one season with the New Orleans Saints. So quite the experience. I think, too, James can express to kids the development that can happen during a college career. Bill, as I'm sure you remember, James wasn't the most highly regarded kid coming out of high school. I believe he was offered by Minnesota, and that was really the only other big-time school before Ohio State got involved, and turns into a player that is one of the best to play the position at Ohio State. So, he is a living example of the kind of development that Ohio State can offer a kid. Obviously, that was a very different coaching staff, but he's seen what it takes to get to that level, despite not being maybe the 5-star prospect. You've seen James too. I remember standing with you at one of the recruiting camps last summer, watching him work with some of the high school kids that were there. What do you think of James Laurinaitis as the coach and kind of what he will bring on a day-to-day basis working with these kids?
Well, as I wrote about it at the time, James Laurinaitis had the best hit I've seen I saw all camp season and maybe all during the football season. He took one of the sleds and he toppled that thing over, and there was a lot of oohs and ahs, and it was impressive to say the least. It was quite a hit. But, also the fact that, and I'm not putting down old people, again, the gray hair is right there, but James Laurinaitis is in the coaching business, at least, he's a relatively young guy. And that often translates into being able to relate to high school kids. And I'll use the example again. Hartline and Walton have been spectacular recruiters, and they're not old guys, to say the least. And I think being able to relate the way that I think James Laurinaitis with his age and all does, and Hartline and Walton, I think that's very important with high school kids.
Yeah, I know there could be at times concerns about a player of Laurinaitis' statue. Can he do it and teach it, right? But I think we've both kind of seen the examples of him being able to teach at a level that you want from an Ohio State coach. Now, I saw on our message boards quickly some naysayers were, well, the linebacker play got worse last year. Well, I don't think that is necessarily the case. I think the defense changed so that you weren't using Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers as much in blitzes and things like that. So maybe the statistics did not look as good. And yes, there were some missed tackles and things like that. I'm not ready to put all that on James Laurinaitis coming in and being the coach. Like I said, I think that he has shown, at least from what we've seen, that he can be a very effective coach. And the experience there, like you said, Bill, speaks for itself. I'm excited to see this. I know that we had kind of speculated with kind of the delay in between the end of the season and now that, maybe James wasn't ready to be out on the road recruiting. He's got a young family at home. He obviously spent a lot of time as an NFL player away from home. I have since been told that that's not the case, that James really enjoyed his time. I think he was out in California most of the time he's been out recruiting. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. Bill, anything else about James Laurinaitis that you think people should know before we get to kind of the other changes that were announced today?
I think you don't get where James Laurinaitis got to without being a hard worker.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned he was not a 5-star guy coming out of high school, but he played like a 5-star guy at Ohio State. He played like a 5-star guy in the NFL. You don't get to that point without being a hard worker. Yeah, a lot of it, some of it's God-given talent, but it also is working hard. And I think that's what you're going to see. I think James Laurinaitis was coast to coast during this winter recruiting period. He was in Texas and Florida. He was all over the place recruiting. He really hit the ground running, and he showed Ryan Day, if there was ever any doubt, hey, this is what I can do and this is what I will do, and I'll go out and get the job done and work hard. So I think that's a big part that also needs to be mentioned.
Yeah, I think maybe that is maybe one of the most important parts is you had this guy in the building. You saw him for a year this past season, and then you got to even see him on the road recruiting. And that was kind of the audition period for James Laurinaitis. And he clearly showed enough, because I don't think Ryan Day is just making this hiring because James Laurinaitis is a Buckeye legend or because there was interest elsewhere potentially. Ryan Day has clearly made an effort this offseason to put the right guys in the right places, both players and coaches. And I think James Laurinaitis is just an extension of that. So I think that's a really good point, Bill. Additionally, with the Laurinaitis news, and maybe went under the radar a little bit, Ryan Day announced some contract extensions, as well as Tim Walton getting a promotion to assistant head coach to go along with secondary coach and cornerbacks coach. He gets a 2-year contract extension, which will keep him at Ohio State through 2026. Jim Knowles gets a 2-year contract extension also through 2026. Larry Johnson, a new 2-year deal, getting him through 2025. And Keenan Bailey gets a 1-year contract extension through 2025. Also, Larry Johnson's son, who played wide receiver at Penn State, Tony Johnson, joins the staff. Bill, I want to start with Tim Walton, who has been on a recruiting tear of late. What is the biggest thing that Tim Walton brings in your mind from the recruiting aspect? Is it similar to what you were saying about James Laurinaitis?
Yeah, it is. And, I think he recruited well initially, but it always helps when you can show, the fruits of your labor, so to speak. And I think similar to Jim Knowles, not that he was to blame totally, but as a staff, Ohio State did not a year ago have great success on the defensive side of the ball recruiting. Well, Jim Knowles put out a really strong defense this year, one of the best in the country, and that really helped bring in the 2024 guys that on the defensive side of the ball, because they saw what Ohio State was doing and had done this year. And I've had so many recruits tell me that, now we see what Ohio State can do defensively under Jim Knowles and his system. That really helped Ohio State's recruiting. And I think it's similar with Tim Walton. The cornerbacks at Ohio State played this year at a level that they didn't play at the year before that.
Yeah,
they were very, very good. Part of that's talent, of course. They had some really good players, bringing in Davison Igbinosun and so on. But somebody coached them, and that was Tim Walton. So I think his development and then the actual showing on the field what his work did has been very important in his recruiting work.
Yeah, to your point, Ohio State was number 96 in the country in pass defense in 2021, allowing 245.8 passing yards per game. That was before Tim Walton got here. This past year, 2 seasons into his tenure, number 1 in the country, allowing 145.8 yards. Now, obviously, there's a lot that goes into any type of defense, but Tim Walton has done an outstanding job. You talk to guys like Denzel Burke. You mentioned Davison Igbinosun. They all credit the work that Tim Walton has done. Another guy who played at Ohio State, played in the NFL. If you remember when Tim Walton was hired, the quote was going around from Jalen Ramsey about how he may be the best coach that Jalen Ramsey's ever had. And Jalen Ramsey's a pretty good one in the NFL. So you obviously can see why this is built, like you said, Bill, first on the field and then in the recruiting. And, right now, Tim Walton is in the 2025 cycle, the number 1 recruiter in 247 Sports rankings with the guys he's landed, two of the top two cornerbacks in the class. So things are going well for Tim Walton right now. Bill, the other one, I think.
And then a third cornerback that is one of the top
Yeah.
10 corners in the country, and Blake Woodby. So
yeah.
You have 3 top 10 guys, including the top 2 guys.
Yeah, I should not leave him out. You're right. I think that some people may have been a bit surprised to see Larry Johnson get a 2-year extension, just with all the rumors about his possible retirement. I think he's 72 years old at this point. What do you think this says about Larry Johnson? And is this a sign that these rumors of retirement are or should not be believed by recruits out there?
Well, I think it says Larry Johnson's got some gas left in the tank.
Yeah.
2 more years. That helps with recruiting because, schools could still say, all right, he won't be there in 3 years. But that's a little more stretched when you can't say, well, he's not going to be there next year or the year after. That's what's been happening on the recruiting trail. Well, he won't be there. Even by the time you get there, he won't be there type thing to recruits. And now they can't use that to the extent that they were before. So I think that really helps recruiting wise.
Yeah, and I know that there's talk about Ohio State's defensive line not producing at the same level as they have in the past. I don't buy that. I mean, statistically, it hasn't been as good. But again, the defense is different under Jim Knowles. And I think you saw when Jack Sawyer really got going. Remember, Jack Sawyer wasn't playing fully defensive end 2 seasons ago. When he got rolling towards the end of the season, he was a monster, especially in that Cotton Bowl game against Missouri. I think 3 sacks in that game. So I think another season with him, JT Tuimalau, who has never been a sack or tackle for a loss specialist. He's been a kind of jack of all trades. If you think back to the Penn State game and just the stuff he can do, both of those guys have made big plays throughout their year. Michael Hall is about to be the 16th defensive lineman drafted under Larry Johnson since his time at Ohio State. You think of the development of both Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. We'll see how Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson come on, but to say that Larry Johnson still isn't one of the best defensive line coaches in the country, if you're just looking at the stats the last few years, then maybe you could point that out. But I think if you really examine kind of what they've done with the defensive line, they still are getting the production, the pressures, the things like that. So I think there's certainly a reason to be excited that Larry Johnson is going to be sticking around at least for 2 more years. The last guy I think we should bring up real quick, Bill, is Keenan Bailey, because he's a guy who's been with the program. I think this will be his 8th season, 8th or 9th, in various roles. But he doesn't get talked about a ton. He was not a full-time assistant until last year, and then he's coaching tight ends, which isn't a position that is the sexiest at Ohio State. What has Keenan Bailey done in your eyes to earn an extension already after his first season as a full-time tight ends coach?
I think it started as his assistant when he was helping out Brian Hartline recruit wide receivers. You ask guys like Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis about being recruited by Ohio State, and they're going to say a lot of great things about Brian Hartline, but they're also going to quickly bring up Keenan Bailey. He did a really good job of helping Brian Hartline when it came to recruiting, and now he is taken that with him as the tight ends coach. Ohio State had been looking for a 2 tight end class for a number of years. And finally, who gets it done? Keenan Bailey gets it done. And that's not to put down Kevin Wilson, because I thought Kevin Wilson did a great job at Ohio State, but Keenan Bailey got those 2 tight ends, and he didn't get just any 2. He beat Michigan for Max LeBlanc, for instance. Michigan absolutely wanted Max LeBlanc pretty bad. And then, of course, I'm thinking
Demarion Witten.
Demarion Witten from Cleveland Glenville. That was an important get too. I mean, you don't want to let a guy like Demarion Witten get out of state. And Demarion Witten had a lot of outstanding offers, and he ended up picking Ohio State. That wasn't a case of, from the get-go, Demarion Witten was going to be a Buckeye. Keenan Bailey had to – at one point, Kentucky thought they had Demarion Witten taken away from Ohio State, and Keenan Bailey got right on that. A couple days later, Demarion Witten camped at Ohio State. Bailey got it done. So I think he brings a young guy, works hard, and knows how to relate to kids, high school kids, and it really just does a great job of selling Ohio State.
Yeah, if you ever get the chance, listeners, viewers, to talk with Keenan Bailey, if you see him out at an Ohio State event, I recommend it. He's one of my favorite guys to talk to. He's fantastic, and you can see why he's been a really good recruiter. And I think this is a big year for tight ends. Obviously, Ohio State brought in a tight end from the transfer portal, but even the guys in the program, I think, could have an impact. You're going to need to replace a very important guy in Cade Stover, but that room is pretty talented, and Keenan Bailey seems to be doing a pretty good job with it, enough to earn a contract extension. So
yeah, and he was important in getting the guy you mentioned as the portal guy, Will Kasmerick. That he's a big addition to Ohio State. I think he's going to be a definite factor in the tight end room. He's going to play a lot, if not be a starter. He'll play a lot and be a big factor.
All right. Well, we wanted to just do something quick here. Our instant reaction to the James Laurinaitis and other staffing news. Bill, thank you for taking about 20 minutes with us. I appreciate it. I think there was some good insight there. And we'll talk to you guys soon, Buckeye fans.